Nobody checked my makeup.
My hair.
Mhm.
It's humid out, so.
3, 2, 1.
Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to the Boardroom Company Live. This is the podcast for professionals who are looking to join boards. I'm Naomi Kent, the host here, and today I am joined. We're actually live in Sarasota at the moment with Dennis Cagan. Hi, Dennis. Welcome.
Thank you, Naomi. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, so thanks for joining me. A lot of other guests that I've had on my podcast are people who have served on boards, but you've been on 73 boards, and I know you told me about that. Tell us about your kind of executive career and then how you got started on boards. Where did all of that start from?
Well, we can go back pretty far, but
Let's do it.
I started with IBM as a computer operator, and I didn't graduate from college. I went to UCLA, but I left and joined the Marine Corps. And so working at IBM, I couldn't get promoted because I didn't have a college degree. So I quit after 366 days exactly, and got a job in sales. And when I left, we were selling computer time sharing, and I would call on people to use the computers. This was remote, dial up over a telephone line with a dial-up phone and
Right.
acoustic coupler and whatnot. And they loved the idea of using a computer, but they said, well, what will we use it for? And I said, well, you need to run software. They go, what software? So while I was doing that, two buddies of mine and I got together. We started a software company to write programs for these people I was trying to sell computer time sharing to.
Mhm.
And at the time, all I read was the Wall Street Journal, Business Week, Forbes, Fortune magazine. I didn't have time for books. I read business publications, and I knew if you had a company, you had to have a board. And so I said to my two buddies, hey, okay, we're going to board here. We're going to do this right. If we're going to have a company, we're going to do it right. So that was our first board. It was a self-made board. And by the way, if you own a private company and you're thinking of creating a board or want to get on a board, there's no better way to start than forming a board yourself and then finding the right people that you want to put on it. So that's how I got started. Then I moved from one thing to another. I started several companies after that. My fifth company I started was in 1976. Year over year, it did 1,000,002, 6, 12, 22, 50, and took it public in 81. It was number 32 on the very, very first Inc. 100 ever published.
Nice.
And about 79 or so, I had buddies on the board. There were no co-founders, but I had some of my investors on the board.
Mhm.
And I thought, I need some independent board members. So that was the first time I reached out, looked around who I knew, got introductions to different people. And I was fortunate enough at that time, we were about a $30 million company at that time, to get a guy that was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company at the time. It was a pharmaceutical distributor called Bergen Brunswick. It's now part of AmerisourceBergen. But he was the CEO and chairman of the board. And he and I hit it off, and he was an expert in distribution. Even though it was pharmaceuticals, my company was distributing computer products. But the technology of distribution was the key component of his value add, plus his maturity, seniority. The vice president of marketing from IBM was on his board. So he was very well connected. So then whenever I started companies, I would add, there were some internal board members usually, but then I would always go out of my way to find the best possible independent board members that I could. As you know, when I just recently formed the board for Bones Coffee, my first person I thought of was a friend of mine who was the president of Starbucks, and he joins the board. So, you're looking for the best that you can get. And the thing that I've noticed over the years is that a lot of people with private companies, they have no idea the stature of board members that they can get with the right circumstances. You're not paying them with early stage companies, but if they like you, if they like what you're doing, if there's something interesting going on, then you can get some very, very senior people to join small company, private company boards.
So it sounds like when you're looking for people to join boards, whether you're on them or you're joining them yourself, there seems to be a sort of parallel between some of the experiences they've had and then some of the experiences that you need on that company. The Starbucks one is interesting because it's Starbucks, it's all coffee, but the distribution one was different, right? So
That's right.
there are times where you need someone from outside the industry. What does that look like?
Well, that reminds me of a comment that I make to some people. If you're running a company in an industry that's never been disrupted, by an Amazon or an Uber or an Airbnb or Facebook or whatever it might be, then you might want to look for a board member that's come from an industry that has been disrupted because they may be better attuned to some of the early signs of disruption. They have some strategies of how to deal with that or to be the disruptor yourself. But there's two aspects to what boards are looking for. One aspect is the skills, the experience, and the connections that somebody has. So the other aspect is the personality traits of the board members, and that's often shortchanged. I wrote an article, and I think it's in the book as well, about the characteristics that are never on a board matrix. Boards never ask for them, but what are the most important characteristics? It's courage, candor, humor, inquisitiveness, and courage, candor, human, and those are the ones.
Communication.
Collaboration. Collaboration. I knew there was another one. And nobody ever asked, but courage is the most important one from my standpoint, because as you know, as we've talked, I've been thrown off of more boards than most people have ever been on. And usually it's because I spoke up about something that wasn't right and where the boards were less independent. And most of my experience, that has been where there were a lot of venture capitalists on the board, and me, and a founder or two. And so really the founders may not have been as experienced or knowledgeable, but I was the one that was supposed to be there having their backs. And so when I would speak up, ultimately it disrupted the direction that the VCs might have wanted the company to go. So they would get together frequently and convince the founders to ask me to leave the board. But so the courage part is that your board members, particularly your independent board members, have to have the courage to speak up, even if nobody else on the board is saying anything. You have to, because maybe they don't want to, maybe it's just a group function, maybe they don't know enough, but somebody needs to speak up and say, no, that's not right. And there have been many circumstances where I was the only one doing that. Sometimes they voted me down anyway. There was a circumstance where we had a board meeting late into the night one time. This was a tech company in Santa Barbara many years ago. And ultimately they gave up. And even the founder was voting with the VCs because he just wanted it over. But they needed a unanimous decision on this particular issue. They didn't want any dissension in this issue. Finally, into the night, everybody else, 8 other board members agreed with me just to get a unanimous decision. So it took all night, but we got there.
That's great. And I think what you look for in board members, and again, you can kind of demonstrate those attributes, right? When you're speaking to people and when you're engaging with people, right? Do you feel like that's easy to do for aspiring board members?
Kind of references another question you had about sort of how do you gauge what board to be on, what not? And you're looking for one. From my standpoint, you're looking for, and I've heard from a lot of people that I've asked to join boards with me. Well, I'm just a this, or I'm just a that. Well, what can I do to help you? They need a connection. They need the right board members need to know what it is that they can contribute. They don't want to just, it's not just about joining one. They're particularly people that don't have to be on boards. It's not about making any money. It's not about prestige. These people are accomplished. They don't care. They want to know, well, what can they contribute? And if you can't identify exactly what they can contribute to the company, they lose interest. Then the other part of it is, if you're looking at management, if you're going to be able to educate and advise a management team on anything, you need to judge that they're open enough to taking your advice. Okay,
True.
that you're not just a placeholder. And a lot of people that are really qualified to be on boards and are very selective, a lot of it is about that. Well, is this board going to listen to me? Am I going to be able to make an impact if I'm?
Mm. Well, let's kind of tag on to that conversation. So you're saying that there are certain questions that you might want to ask people in an interview. And I know you've written a book. It's called The Board of Directors of a Private Enterprise. And it goes through how to set up a board, why you should set up a board. And there's a chapter in there, which I love, by the way. And I've actually pulled out some questions, and I do work with my clients on some of these questions, but questions you should ask, people that you want to be on your board, questions you should ask them. So tell us a little bit about the types of questions that get asked in interviews and how we should be thinking about the answer to those.
Well, generally speaking, it's all in the questions that you want to ask them. If they don't answer them up front, if they don't give you, and also going into a board interview, it's clearly and advisably better practice to study up, to look them up, to understand the company, to understand maybe who's going to be interviewing you. I'm a big fan of all board members interviewing a new prospective board member. It doesn't happen that often, but I'm a big fan of it, doing it individually. A lot of boards will maybe do it collectively. Sometimes there's no interviews. Sometimes it may just be the chairman, or if it's a slightly more advanced board, whoever runs the Nom-Gov committee, nominating and governance committee. Sometimes it's just the CEO. Hey guys, I have a board member I'd like to bring on, or the founder, or whatever. But I really like being able to, for the board's sake, for all of them to interview the candidate to make sure that they feel the candidate's going to be a good cultural fit. I tell people that for any given board position, there may be 100 really, really well qualified people for that board position, but there may only be 1 or 2 that are suitable.
Right.
Okay. Because it's personality, and there's a lot of other factors than just being qualified for it. But you should study up. You should know who you're talking to, what their background is about the company. And then if there's anything that came out that would help you judge how you would fit in, how do you deal with your marketing? How's your marketing department organized? Or tell me a little bit about your CFO, if I'm going to be chair of the finance committee. How long have they been there? What is their background? Who audits you? You're going to have those kinds of what I'd call more technical questions, but they're situational questions about the company, how it's run, who's running it. You might ask about competitors. You're looking for anything you can relate to that where you can clearly see your potential contribution. They're going to ask you questions trying to determine exactly the same thing, because, and this is important, in order to properly, this is my opinion, in order to properly recruit independent directors in particular, you need to assess what are the most important skills, experience, and connections that will help this particular company, this specific exact company that you have. What are the most important skills, connections, and experience that are critical to growing and making this company successful? Then once you know what those are, then you check off the ones that you already have. Like, okay, I'm the founder and I'm an expert in nanoscience. Okay, I don't need another expert in nanoscience.
Right.
I once gave a speech about the worst boards that I'd ever been on. And I sat down afterwards, and this guy next to me said, "Hey, I really like your speech. It was great, but I've got a way worse board than any board you've ever been on." I said, "Really?" I said, "What do you do?" He said, "Well, I'm the CEO of a legal malpractice insurance company." And I said, "Really?" I said, "Well, does your board look at it?" He says, "Well, we got 13 investors, 13 owners of the company, including myself, and they're all on the board, and they're all malpractice attorneys." I said, you win.
It's gotta be a tough one.
you're looking for the
Yeah.
skill sets that you don't have.
Yeah.
So I've got a marketing guy and I have well, wait, I don't have a CFO, or I don't have a this or that. You're trying to fill the gaps or elevate the expertise above what you have yourself. So that's the matrix you're trying to fill. So if you're now interviewing for a board position, if you're light on manufacturing expertise, if you're light on international expertise, if you're light on human capital management, the three things that I think are the most missing in boards today, it's somewhat ironic, but the three categories of skills that are the most lacking in boards today, from my experience, are number one, technology. Unless it's a technology company, most boards don't have anybody that really understands, particularly information technology. And obviously, there's a lot of talk about cybersecurity. Most boards solve that by hiring a consultant. But yet there's nobody on the board that can even understand what the consultant has to say. And you also notice in many big companies, the CIO, CTO, CSO, whoever's a senior technology officer, doesn't report to the CEO. They report to either the COO or the CFO, meaning finance is more important than technology, or operations are more important, and everything gets sold. And the biggest joke to me is having a CFO or a COO get in front of the board and give the technology update that they got from the CTO that reports to them. And so technology, marketing, and human capital, to me, are the three most important things to companies today. The biggest differentiators between companies today are marketing and technology, branding, and their use of technology. Yet those are the three most missed skill sets in boards, unless you get a really big board. But
now, I know, obviously, talking about boards and the different skill sets that are needed, I know you've written some articles, and I've read them, about bringing on younger board directors, and I think that brings some diversity, right, to the board, bringing in younger board members. Define young, first of all, and then tell us about why that's important.
So I got a call a few years ago from the editor of Directors and Boards magazine. He's retired now, but he says, would you write an article? I'd written a number of articles for him. Would you write an article on bringing young people onto the board? And I said, what do you mean young? He said, well, now there's a slight trend of bringing people in their 20s or 30s onto boards. I'd like you to write an article about how the board, which is obviously older, typically averaging in their 50s, 60s or whatever, how they should onboard these younger people. And I said, Jim, if I were to write the article, it would be about why you shouldn't do that in the first place. And because of this and this and this, and he says, okay, that's not what I had in mind. He said, I'll tell you what, if you write my article for me, then you can write a sidebar and I'll publish that too. So it went out with my little sidebar in it about that. And
this was specifically about corporate boards, right?
These were
about corporate, larger company
about
boards.
Corporate boards.
Yes.
And the thing is, it's not about age.
No.
It's about, you have to look past it in both directions.
Mm-hmm.
You have to look past it in terms of being too young. And you have to look past it. Sorry, it's as a personal plug, but you have to look past it in terms of being too old.
Right.
But it's really about what you've done, what you know how to do. Your connections are a big part of being on a board. I don't want to minimize that at all. I mean, the first time anything comes up in a board meeting, I'll say, well, who do we know? Who knows who? Some people look at that as negative. I look at it as positive. You want that network. You want that, because you have another question about networks. I know you want that network as big and broad as possible, and you're bringing people on. If somebody is good enough to be on a board, if you want them on your board, then likely they're going to know some other people that might be very helpful. In fact, when I'm talking to people about how to recruit board members, I'll tell them to go after anybody you can think of or heard of, even if you think they're way out of your league, because very few people are insulted if you ask them to join your board, or can I
Right.
interview you to join the board? That's not an insult. And even people who have no interest in being on a board will often say, yeah, okay, I'll talk to you, because they know that they may know somebody. And the thing is, you get an hour, hour and a half, 2-hour lunch or whatever with these people. That's thousands of dollars worth of consulting
Right.
that you just got for the price of a lunch from this expert person, whoever it is. And in the end, I'm not really interested in your board, but I do know a couple other people you might want to talk to. And then you get an introduction to these other people. Maybe they're a level in their career below this person, but they may be spot on if this person is sharp in the recommendation in terms of how valuable they can be to you. So I think I answered that question somewhere in there.
Yeah, you did. No, I think there's we don't see a lot of people in their 20s and 30s joining some of these bigger corporate boards, but it does happen, right? And in certain cases, would you argue that it's it could be a family member potentially, or it could be, or is it a different play? What are they doing?
That's a great question. One of my boards has 5 family members. They're not young, they're 40s and up, but all 5 are the owners, and they're all on the board. And then I have 5 independent board members to kind of balance that out, so they can get the expertise in deciding what they want to do. But it really depends, and it depends on the person. I think that that younger people that are interested in governance and want to be on boards. I wouldn't expect to make a lot of money being on a board if you're in your 20s or 30s, or in fact, even if you're older than that, if it's, if it's an early stage company.
Yeah.
But it's good to get started in your career. A lot of people start with nonprofit boards, or school boards, or this or that or the other thing. And all of those are contributing experience. Some is experience on what not to do. Some is experience on what to do. Kind of depends on the organization. But if you have a unique set of skills, one good example would be if and this is just one that comes to mind, which is just an example, is if a big part of your marketing strategy has to do with social media and with your digital footprint,
e-commerce
and e-commerce in general, then at the board level, it might be worthwhile having somebody that can add that expertise to it. But a number of years ago, when I wrote that article about young people on the board, I was thinking of one particular very, very, very large company, and I won't name it, that had just put 2 very, very young executives on their board. And neither one of those executives had ever been on a board before. And in one case, the board that the company that they came from had never had any revenue. It sold for billions of dollars, but it never had any revenue. And the other one never had any profit. But they put these 2 people on the board, in my opinion, as marquee, as poster children of, look how sharp we are. We got these 2 tech people on our board.
Right.
Well, fast forward about 15 plus years, and a friend of mine, turns out, was a C-level executive with that company and attended those board meetings. And so I asked her, what happened? And then I never prompted her. I said, do you remember when so-and-so and so was put on that board? She said, oh yeah. She said, I went to those board meetings. I said, well, tell me what was going on there? She said, oh my gosh. She said, first of all, with this particular company, you could tell how important the board members are about where they sat. And they sat, these 2 people, at the very far end of the table. There were like 20 board members, and they were the far end of the table. And they never even spoke. Nobody ever asked them any questions. And she said it was totally about the optics of putting them on the board.
Status, right? Bringing these people in.
I knew it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and there's been lots of stories about boards where, it's they're basically a figurehead, right, on the board, and they're brought in to bring in a cultural, fit or something like that. I'm not sure, or change the direction of the business. Maybe.
There's a lot of cases backing into that comment. There's a lot of cases where it appears that was the composition of some boards that got into big trouble because the board members never questioned what was going on. Like there were some famous senators and generals and other people that were on some of these boards strictly for marquee value that didn't know much about the business. Not that people were bad, but they weren't even hardly allowed to contribute to it.
Right.
There's something I wrote a chapter. No, it wasn't in the book. It was an article called "The Mushroom Board."
Oh yeah.
And what I call a mushroom board, it was in one of the magazines I wrote, but what I call a mushroom board is a board that the CEO or the chairman, or usually it's the CEO chairman combined, comes in and gives you a deck or a report, kind of goes through it and barely asks, are there any questions? And he just feeds you exactly what they want to, he or she, feeds you exactly whatever they want to feed you. Nobody asks any questions. So it's like mushrooms. They feed you, you know what, and keep you in the dark. So
right. I love it. And actually, just before we sign on, we were talking about the new Bones coffee, right? That's got mushrooms
mushroom
in
coffee,
it.
yeah.
So we were talking about that. So I thought that was slightly related. So is that a bad board? Would you define that as a bad board?
Absolutely.
A standoffish board, right? A board that is not really involved.
Yeah. And sometimes people will say, well, when they're new on a board, they like to kind of get the feeling of they like to read the room.
Right. You don't need
before
to
they
talk
start
in every meeting.
Showing off and speaking up. But it's really about not making your presence known. It's really about contributing to a discussion. And a good example is that one of my oldest boards, which goes back to 1997, I've been on the board. It's a company I co-founded in 1997. And there's one gentleman in his 90s on the board. And he had been on the board of General Motors, Raytheon, Hewlett Packard, and Hughes Electronics. So this guy's, he's on my board. And the CEO will go around and say, okay, so-and-so, do you have any more comments? You know, giving everybody the opportunity to make a comment on this subject that we're discussing. And so many times in meetings, people will feel that they have to make a comment.
Right.
And the thing about this guy is, no, he says, I just agree with whatever he said. And or naming somebody, nothing. And just the maturity to pass if somebody already said what he said, not to have to get on a soapbox and restate the same stuff again. And so
it's like a confidence,
but
being humble with it. You don't need to be the loudest person.
But the CEO wants to make sure that everybody, he draws them out by saying, okay, by name, do you have anything else to add to this before we go ahead and vote or make a decision or whatever, or end the discussion? So yeah, a bad board is one. And a bad board really is the result of whoever put them on the board, not them.
Right. And who's allowing them to stay on the board.
And that's
a
whole nother subject. I wrote when NACD magazine, NACD directorship magazine, National Association of Corporate Directors, when their magazine wanted to review my book, they said, well, we'd like to print a chapter. What chapter can we print? I said, hey, take your pick, print any chapter you want. And then when they told me what chapter they wanted to reprint, it was very amusing because it was a subject that they had never, ever had an article on this particular subject. In 35 years of the magazine, they had never written an article on this particular element of governance, which was how to fire a board member. I wrote a whole chapter because you're not firing a subordinate. You're often firing somebody that's even more accomplished than you are sometimes. And so
how do you fire a board member?
Well, but the last thing is whenever a bad board member, either they're disruptive or they're falling asleep or whatever it is,
and not involved,
and you don't want them anymore. Most of the comments I hear, well, they only have 2 more years on their term, so we'll be rid of them soon. No, that's not the answer. And that's very, very poor governance. If somebody's not performing, the chairman, the CEO, the NomGov committee, whoever's driving that process for that company, they need to step up and get rid of them. And there's diplomatic ways of doing it. But even if it ends up not being diplomatic, you your fiduciary responsibility is not to the other board members. It's to the shareholders and the owners. And keeping a bad board member, number one, you're you're compensating them.
Right. You're compensating them. They may have equity. They
They're
may have all
taking up
kinds of things.
They're
Yeah.
taking up space.
Yeah.
They're adding advice, which even when they do add advice, it might not be very good advice. And you're missing the opportunity to upgrade.
Mhm.
Your board seats are not life. They're not for life. And as a company grows, it needs different skills, different people, and so forth. So you should always be looking at who we can add or how we can upgrade the board members. Sometimes that involves asking one board member to step down. Like there might be several people from management on the board of an early stage company. Well, as the company grows, you may want to replace some of those people with independent directors. But you always want to, if you're in a startup, you don't necessarily want somebody on the board that came from $100 billion company.
Right.
Okay. But if
might not be a good fit.
But if you're 100, 200, $300 million company, maybe you don't need somebody that's expertise is in startups anymore. Maybe you need a broader knowledge basis over it. So,
all right. So what is your advice if you need to get rid of somebody? What would you do? Is there a sort of slow process, or are you fast process?
It doesn't require it interestingly enough, from my standpoint, it doesn't require the diligence that getting rid of an employee does.
Okay.
Because the labor laws don't really apply. They're not employees.
Right.
So that makes it a little bit easier, but it needs to be diplomatic. It depends on if you want the person to leave liking you or not liking you. Okay. And, or if they push back on it. Sometimes just a suggestion. There's different techniques. Obviously, you can move them from a board member to a consultant if you want to ease them out a little, or an advisor if you want to ease them out a little bit more slowly. You can, if they're getting paid, then there could be some kind of a severance package. If they have options or stock, you could extend the vesting period a little bit, or accelerate the vesting on some of that. It can be, but somebody has to address them directly, because keeping them around is not
Yeah, it's not
it's
easy.
not,
Yeah. Well, you've been on lots of different types of boards, right? We've talked about a few of them. You've talked about family-owned businesses. I know you've been on a few of those, publicly traded companies, privately held companies, VC-backed companies, all sorts. So what are your kind of thoughts on like, how are these boards different, and how do you navigate? And not a lot of people have been on all these different types of boards. So
and one size does not fit all.
Right.
So let me say that
Right.
up front. And sure, as the companies grow, it's natural to have slightly increasing formality in things and a little bit more organization. Very, very early stage startup and early stage companies can be a little bit more informal, just more like meetings of the mind, so to speak. One of the inflection points is when you bring on your first outside investors.
Then you have to.
Then you got to get a little
up.
bit more
Yep.
serious. When you bring on your first independent director, you may want to look a little bit more professional than you did before they got there. So you start to upgrade the processes. But it doesn't have to be an overly formal, can I get a second? Oh, there's a second. No, you don't need the full Robert's Rules of Order. But and depending, for example, a VC-backed company means that there's already venture capitalists that have invested in it. And so the chances are very good that at least one of them will be on the board. Very seldom will they invest with no board seats. And often it may be, if there's multiple venture firms in a round, then they may pick one, or they may pick two out of the round to have representatives on the board. Well, you are now stuck with them forever. Okay. No matter who they are, they could be great assets. They could be jerks. They could be associates that just graduated from Stanford Business School with an MBA and don't even know how to spell board. So you don't know what you're going to get. You can lobby for a more senior person, but that board, of course, the VCs tend to have an overweight because the founders are very sensitive to working not only to upset the. On the other hand, I've got one of my boards where the founders put in $15 million of his own money, and so the board really, it's his deal. We're there to support him. We're there to help him.
Right.
And
They're
so,
outside advisors
yeah,
versus
and
being inside.
exactly.
Yeah.
Even though we're on the board and we have a vote,
Independence.
when you have controlling interest in the company, the board does have a vote. But if you have majority, you can vote anybody off the board you don't want. You don't have to actually take their advice. That's a big fallacy with owners of private companies creating boards. Well, I don't want to have to listen to somebody else. Well, if you own the company, you appoint the board members, or you take them off the board if you don't want them. Sorry, we're done. Thanks. And the stage of the company, sometimes the industry, but the stage is more important. Earlier stage, mid stage, the growth of the company. You get also other issues with the board have to do with what business the company is in, because some businesses have a lot more compliance issues, a lot more regulatory issues. So if you have a company that you got the Federal Trade Commission, Federal Communications Commitment, you've got the IRS, the SEC, you've got every single agency, then you've got the state governments, the Secretary of State of each, and there's regulatory issues. In certain businesses, those can become critical. For instance, if you've got a call center and you're regulated by the Federal Trade Commission, okay, if you're in any kind of communications, you're regulated by the Federal Communications Commission. Well, it's depending on the level that you're in that industry, it may help to have expertise on the regulatory side as well. I mean, I could tell more stories, but it's quick, make this story very fast. Was a company that was thinking of going public. They had a call center. They were just thinking about how to put a board together. And they said, well, why should we have a board? And I said, well, you have a board because it might tell you things you're not aware of. Well, we're aware of everything. Well, okay, you got a call center, and you don't know anything about the Federal Trade Commission, and you're processing this many credit cards for this much volume. You don't have money in the bank. It was a whole bunch of factors, but I said, you're highly at risk by being investigated by the Federal Trade Commission. And if they enjoined you from billing the credit cards, you could be out of business in 90 days. They said, well, we know everything about it. They were going to be acquired, so they never put the board together. The acquisition fell apart. I said, why did it fall apart? They checked to find out it fell apart because the buyer had concerns about their Federal Trade Commission compliance.
Oh, no.
In the process of recruiting board members, I was ready to put a woman on the board who had been an attorney with the Federal Trade Commission. And now she was the head of consumer affairs for one of the biggest companies in the country. And they didn't put the board together. So she didn't get on the board, whatnot. The deal fell apart. They were investigated by the Federal Trade Commission later. I think that the buyer asked about their compliance.
Right. And then it triggered something.
They looked to see, they got investigated. They settled it with a $22.5 million fine. Okay. If they just put this woman on the board,
she would have known. She would have been able to advise them on what to do.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Just like that. So sometimes, and that was a very unique, because that was a very targeted, very high risk. This was a $265 million company. That was the biggest risk they had, in my assessment, that they weren't even aware of. But normally you like board members to have a slightly broader set of skills, and then also have that added layer of judgment that comes from the maturity, from having been through the wars.
Oh, that's very helpful. And when you think about the boards you're on today, what do you really enjoy about them? Because I know you told me there's a bourbon company. I didn't know about that. And by the way, if anyone wants to go to Dennis's LinkedIn, it took me quite a long time to go through all your experience and to click and keep going. So yeah, there's a lot in there. But yeah, there's a coffee company, bourbon company, you're in telecommunications as well. So what do you like about everything you're doing?
Semiconductors, nanoscience.
There we go.
Biology, pharmaceutical, plasmid production. I mean, all kinds of businesses. They all involve technology in one way or the other, but they're not tech companies. Air conditioning company, construction company. I've got both, two different ones. But what I that's the easiest question you've asked me.
Okay, good.
And you know me, it's the people. It's the people. The first thing I ask about if somebody wants me on their board is, well, who else is on it? Then I want to know who is on it. I want to meet with them and talk to them. And they said, well, there's just, me and Mary over here. I said, okay, well, great. Are we going to create a board here? You want more people? Which then it gives me the opportunity to help find people that I know and that I like, and importantly, that I can learn from to be on the board. I don't want anybody on the board that there's nothing I can learn from them. I want to enrich myself at the same time. And I want somebody smarter than me on some of these other areas. The favorite thing that happened to me, that 94-year-old gentleman I mentioned who had been on the board of General Motors and all that stuff. The biggest compliment I ever got was we were in a board meeting one time a number of years ago, and the subject of compensation came up. This is a startup, basically. Even though it's been around a long time, it's still a relatively small company. And so the CEO said, hey, what do you think about this compensation question? And this guy said, I'm sorry, that's not my area of expertise. He said, Dennis, what do you think? And I thought, oh my gosh, that's all right.
Hopefully you had an answer.
And I did, but he knew that I knew more about compensation in early stage companies. He didn't.
Mm. But he didn't need to know. You don't need to know everything.
Right.
It's definitely not the case.
And now, then there was another situation where this is semiconductors and wireless communications and stuff. The CEO was writing something on the board, and this guy raised his hand. He was he's the former president of two major universities, chancellor of two major universities. So the CEO wrote something, some equation on the board, and he said, I have a dumb question. And I couldn't help myself. I blurted out without even thinking. I said, shit, if he's got a dumb question, where does that leave the rest of us?
Right. Well, good. Well, it sounds like there's something in common with all the boards that you're on. Sounds like you're really enjoying it. Great people, great leadership, great board members, right? When you've been, obviously you're on a number of boards today. How have you built your board career? Sort of what do you attribute your board career today to? Like, what are some of the things that you've been doing over the years?
I think that in here somewhere was a question about networking and how do you get on boards? So if I blend all that together, the thing is that if you're coming off a C-level job in a Fortune 100 company, basically all you have to do is call a couple of people, raise your hand in the air wherever you're sitting.
Or your phone's probably already ringing.
I'm here.
It's already done.
Or it's already, exactly. Okay. If you're a regular person and not
like
in
the rest of us.
not in that league, then it's work to get on a board. And somebody somewhere has to know of a board that needs a person, whether it's their board or a company they work for or somebody they know or something somewhere. Somebody has to know of the job. And they have to know of you. And they have to connect the two. And so that's about people. Now, yes, you may find some prospective board members on LinkedIn. You may find some prospective board members on one of your favorite AI systems, like who would be a good board member for this or that or the other thing. But the best board member may not have the highest profile. They may not be on there, or you're going to kiss a lot of frogs that way, and they're not going to know you, and you're not going to know them. So it's degrees of separation, and so. The more people you meet, the more people you can engage with so that they remember you, and picking the right people that might know of a board position, might be entrepreneurs or might know entrepreneurs or might know people of maybe they're just somebody at the country club who happens to do business with a number of different people. Investors. Yeah. You're looking for people. If you're something that very few people think about at least when I mention it, if you're on a nonprofit board, who else is on that board? Okay. Well, maybe there is an executive from a company here or there. Maybe it's not even a high level one, but so you're going to network with the people that you're on the nonprofit board with. You're going to network with neighbors and friends. Like I went to a neighborhood thing the other day, and I'm always interested. Okay, where do you work and what do you do? Where do you, but now I'm not looking for myself, but I'm looking for what do they do? Maybe they're interesting. Maybe I can use, they can contribute to something that I'm involved in. So it's who you meet, it's networking, it's work. You have to, like you coach your clients, you have to be prepared both mentally, and you have to have the right materials to deliver. You can't necessarily rely on somebody remembering everything about you.
Right.
So you need a nice board bio or whatever it is. But basically, it's about getting out there. So if you came out of a company in an even a moderate position, call your former colleagues, call people that worked at vendors, call people, anybody that you might have known. As a good friend of mine coined the term, and I'm not sure he coined it, but for many years, 1,000 cups of coffee. Okay. You need to have 1,000 cups of coffee. No pun intended with my Bones coffee, but
yeah.
And if you drink coffee, go to Bones.
Go to Bones and drink 1,000 of those.
And order some. But you need 1,000 cups of coffee.
Yeah, it's true.
You need, and it's not about email. It's not about this. It's about communicating with people. And by the way, it doesn't have to actually be in person. I tell people I met a woman over 15 years ago on the phone. We stayed in touch. We never met. We stayed in touch. Then video conferencing comes in. So once in a while we would talk on video conference. 15 years. Finally, she hears that I'm on this one particular board. She's semi-retired, but very high level, C-level executive. And she says, "Oh, wow, that sounds really interesting. Are you looking for board members? I really want to be on that board." So I introduced her to the rest of the team and whatnot. And yes, they liked her and she had a valuable contribution. So we put her on the board. So we met the night before the very first board meeting of this new board. It was the first time we had ever seen each other in person.
Wow. In 15 years.
15 years.
Wow.
So
you can build a really good relationship. You can build that trust.
That's right.
But it makes a difference, right? When you've met in person and you shake someone's hand.
Yeah. And they have to know about you so they can appropriately advise you. You have to know about them so you can ask the right questions. So.
Well, let's talk about that, because we chatted about that just briefly before we started, right? You and I talk about this a lot. When you meet someone, you want to sort of find out about them first. Try and see who they are. Be genuinely interested, right, in what other people do and who they are. And you kind of have to train yourself to do that, I think, a little bit. But it's got to be genuine. It's got to be authentic. So what do you do? What are some of the tricks that you use?
Well, one thing was, I hadn't thought about this in advance at all, but one of the things that I realize is that when you're meeting people in a more of a networking environment, the one thing that annoys me the most is when somebody is not sensitive. They're not reading the room. They're not realizing that this person, you're not the only person that this person wants to talk to or needs to talk to.
We've all been there, right? We've all been in those situations.
And so either you're waiting to talk to somebody and somebody's just like, will not let this other person go, or you're that person, you won't let them go, and they're squirming and you don't even notice that they're squirming, trying to get away and trying to. Yeah. So, but you're not going to, what I tell a lot of the folks that I work with, what's your objective in this meeting? What's your objective in this conversation? And in many cases, your objective isn't to raise money. Your objective isn't to sell them something. Your objective isn't to buy something. It isn't to become better. Your objective is to get the next conversation, to get the next meeting, to take it to the next level. So all you're trying to do is sync up so that if you want to talk to them again, if you feel that there's something there, they will be willing to talk to you again. That's your objective, period. The first time. The second time, maybe there's another step you want to take. But people miss that. They feel if they haven't sold something in that first conversation that they've failed. No. Being in too big a hurry, not getting that also is off-putting. because that person doesn't even know if they want to buy what you're selling or whatever it is. So getting to know a little bit about them and deciding, do you want to have another meeting? If so, that's your objective. And particularly with it's most prevalent in fundraising when an entrepreneur goes out to raise money. No, all you're trying to do is, and that person might be a gatekeeper. You just want to get past that person. So.
No, I like that. And again, less transactional, right? You want it to be less transactional when you're engaging with people. And I think a lot of most business is done. And like you said, you brought people onto these boards that you liked, people that you trusted. You have to build that trust, right? Over time. Maybe it's 15 years, maybe it's a little less, but it does take time, right?
That's, and and I know that you had some questions about problems with boards, bad boards, things like that. And I mentioned the mushroom board, but one problem often is the leadership of the board, where there is no leader. There is not somebody that everybody respects and everybody can listen to. When I talk about courage being an important attribute for being on a board, humor. So if the board gets into conflict, gets into an argument, it becomes dysfunctional. Sometimes one of the best things is if there's somebody there that everybody has respect for, and that usually would be the chairperson, or the chairman, the chairperson, or the founder, or whatever. If they have some humor, they can crack a joke. Everybody relax. You go back to business.
Right. So you like
so
that.
That's
you think it's important.
So that's how it can be.
Yeah.
That's how it can be helpful.
I like that.
But
that's great. And then just to sort of wrap up here, and by the way, you and I could talk a lot longer about this whole topic, but what is happening in business now and into 2026? What do you think is really exciting that we need to be aware of or just be thinking about?
Well, the topic of the day for just about everybody, if you were to have to pick one, I mean, besides the economy, which everybody
always talk
the economy is
about.
the economy,
Yeah.
but the biggest threat, opportunity, and I think everybody in the audience can relate to this, is currently AI. Okay, a few years ago it was cyber. Okay, cyber hasn't gone away, although now cyber and AI are getting together. There was just a huge hack because somebody got Claude to they trained Claude to hack. And so it's the AI, Claude's an AI, but
they're getting together.
They automated it.
I like it.
They automated it and got around all the security precautions, everything. So cyber is still very, very important as a risk factor. Technology in general is still extremely important as an enabler for business, and the most important common denominator of business today is your automation and your ability to effectively use technology. Well, that leads into AI. So AI itself is probably the biggest topic of boards these days, and how you deal with it, how you integrate it into your business, and so forth. And it's not about layoffs. It's about how you can accelerate, enhance what you're doing with AI, not necessarily replacing people, but moving people into higher level functions. So
and being more competitive, right? It's essentially competition.
Yeah. A few years from now, if you didn't protect yourself from cyber, you were hacked, and it was a serious risk, and it was expensive. A few years from now, if you don't use AI and somebody else is, they're going to be that much further ahead of you.
And I know you got a funny story about AI being used in the boardrooms and things like that. I know you got a good story about that. But yeah, a lot of board members are leveraging AI, and there are a lot of questions around the policies that should be in place for people where it comes to sharing information on some of these open platforms and things like that, right?
The thing I would say about AI in the boardroom, this is
for not, board members.
Yes, yeah. This is the board members using AI.
Right.
Is you should be using AI to be smarter, not to look smarter. Okay, it's not like you got your AI back here and you say, oh, it's telling you what questions to ask. Okay, well, what about this? Wow, that's a great question. No, that's not the purpose. The purpose is to educate yourself, to expand on what's going on. I use it to check documents. I don't use it to summarize board materials myself. But it's a personal issue. And first of all, there probably aren't that many board members that know squat about AI, to be honest with you.
It's an area they
because
need
there aren't
to
many that know much about
research.
technology.
Yeah.
And so it's
Yeah.
going to be rare that they know what they're doing. And if they don't know what they're doing, then there's a chance that they're misusing it. And I will tell one story that I just posted recently on LinkedIn about about Henry Ford in the 20s. Quick version of the story. You probably remember it.
Yeah.
He manufactured cars in the 1920 time frame, and one of his machines broke, and none of his engineers could fix his machine. So he called this famous guy named Charles Steinmetz, famous engineer, to come in on a consulting basis to fix his machine. And Steinmetz comes by, pad and paper, looks at the machine, makes a few notes, then says to somebody, bring me a piece of chalk. And he brings him a piece of chalk, and Steinmetz gets up on a ladder and puts a big X at the top of the machine and says, underneath this cover, there's copper coils. He says, take 6.5 turns off the copper coil and your machine will work. So they did that. And so Steinmetz sends Ford a bill for $10,000. And Ford says, this is ridiculous, $10,000 for drawing a chalk mark. So Steinmetz says, well, no, let me send you another invoice. The other invoice comes, says, chalk mark, $1. Knowing where to put it, $9,999. Okay. And the point is, even with AI, knowing how to prompt AI, how to ask the questions, what kind of additional information to give it. You don't just say, what's the best way to do such and such? You need to, so the smarter you are, the smarter you can make AI, and the less hallucinations or other bad data is going to be coming back. So
no, I love that story.
Quick anecdote.
Love it, Dennis. Well, listen, thank you so much for joining me here in Sarasota live as well. This has been great. I really enjoyed talking to you. And I always learn something, and I always hear a new story. So this is fantastic. So thank you very much for joining me. Thank you.
Awesome, guys.
Great.